A loyal palace guard stood at the crossroads between duty and conscience. For months, he watched in silence as those closest to Prince William orchestrated a web of lies and manipulation. Every instinct told him to speak up, but one word could cost him everything he had worked for his entire life. His pension, his reputation, his family's security all hanging by a thread. But when he discovered what they were planning next, he knew silence was no longer an option. What he was about to reveal would shake the palace walls and change one man's life forever. This is the story of the guard who risked it all to tell the truth. Marcus Thompson had served in the royal security detail for 17 years. He was not the kind of man who sought attention or glory. He came from a working-class family in Yorkshire, where his father had been a factory worker and his mother a schoolteacher. They had taught him the value of hard work, honesty, and keeping your head down. When Marcus joined the palace security at 23, he thought he had found his calling. The uniform, the tradition, the sense of purpose, it all meant something to him. Over the years, Marcus had become invisible in the best possible way. He blended into the background, always present but never intrusive. He knew the schedules, the patterns, the faces of everyone who mattered. He had protected 3 generations of royals, and in all that time, he had never once broken protocol or spoken out of turn. His colleagues respected him. His superiors trusted him. And the family members he guarded barely noticed him, which was exactly how it should be. Prince William was different, though. From the first day Marcus was assigned to his detail, he noticed something about the young prince. William had a way of acknowledging the staff that others did not. A nod here, a brief thank you there. Nothing excessive, but enough to remind Marcus that he was seen as a human being, not just a fixture in the hallway. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Everything changed in the autumn when new staff members arrived. A private secretary named Richard Ashworth came highly recommended from another noble household. He was smooth, polished, and always said the right things. Within weeks, he had positioned himself as indispensable to William. Marcus watched as Ashworth slowly began to control access to the prince, deciding who could speak with him and when. At first, it seemed like efficiency. But Marcus had been around long enough to recognize something else, a power play. Then there was Victoria Aldridge, a new communications advisor. She was brilliant at her job, no question about it. But Marcus noticed how she would twist facts in the briefings she gave to William. She would present information in ways that served her agenda, leaving out crucial details that might lead the prince to different conclusions. Marcus stood in countless meetings, silent and still, hearing half-truths being presented as complete pictures. The turning point came on a cold November evening. Marcus was stationed outside William's private study when he overheard a conversation between Ashworth and Victoria. They did not know he was there, or perhaps they did not care. They were discussing a charity project that William was passionate about, a mental health initiative for young people. William had been working on it for months, pouring his heart into every detail. Marcus heard Victoria laugh, a cold sound that made his skin crawl. She said the project was a waste of time and resources, but they needed to let William think it was moving forward. Ashworth agreed, adding that they had already redirected most of the funding to other initiatives that would generate better publicity. They would give William just enough information to keep him satisfied while they handled the real decisions. As long as the prince believed he was making a difference, that was all that mattered. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. This was not just palace politics or bureaucratic maneuvering. This was deliberate deception. They were manipulating someone who genuinely cared about helping people. Someone who was using his position to try to make a real difference. And they were laughing about it. For days, Marcus wrestled with what he had heard. He told himself it was not his place to get involved. He was security, not staff. His job was to protect physical safety, not to mediate internal politics. But the conversation haunted him. He thought about his own children, about the young people who needed the help that mental health initiative was supposed to provide. He thought about the trust William placed in these people who were betraying him daily. Marcus started paying closer attention. He began to notice patterns he had overlooked before. Important messages that never reached William. Meetings that were rescheduled without his knowledge. Decisions being made in his name that he had never actually approved. It was a systematic isolation, a bubble being constructed around the prince to control what he knew and what he could do. One afternoon, Marcus was escorting William to a vehicle when a young intern approached nervously. She had a folder of documents that she said were urgent regarding the mental health project. Before she could hand them over, Ashworth appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He smoothly intercepted the folder, assuring the intern he would make sure the prince received it. The girl looked uncertain, but had no choice but to comply. Marcus watched Ashworth walk away in the opposite direction, with the folder tucked under his arm. Those documents never made it to William. Marcus checked later as casually as he could manage. The intern was transferred to a different department the following week. The system was more elaborate than Marcus had initially realized. It was not just Ashworth and Victoria. There were others involved, each playing their part in managing what William knew and believed. They had created an alternative reality for him, one where he thought he was in control but was actually being guided like a puppet. Marcus began to document what he observed. Nothing official, nothing that could be traced back to him. Just notes on his personal phone, timestamps, and details of what he saw and heard. He did not know what he would do with this information, but his instincts told him to keep a record. Years of training had taught him that evidence mattered. The situation escalated when Marcus overheard another conversation. This time about William's schedule for an upcoming royal tour. Ashworth was planning to keep William so busy with meaningless photos, opportunities, and ceremonial duties that he would have no time for the substantive meetings he had requested with local mental health organizations. The entire tour was being structured to prevent William from having real conversations that might reveal what was actually happening with his initiatives. Marcus realized then that this had gone beyond office politics. This was about stripping someone of their agency, of their ability to do the work they cared about. And it was all being done with smiles and assurances, with professionalism and protocol as cover. That night, Marcus sat in his small apartment, staring at the notes on his phone. He thought about his pension just 3 years away. He thought about his wife, Sarah, who had supported him through every late night and scheduled change over 17 years. He thought about his daughter, studying at university, and his son, who wanted to follow in his footsteps into security work. Speaking up could cost him everything. Palace staff who made waves did not last long. No matter how many years of loyal service they had, he would be labeled as insubordinate, unreliable, someone who had overstepped his bounds. His career would be over, and he might struggle to find another position at his age. The pension he had worked 17 years to secure could be jeopardized. But Marcus also thought about his father, who had taught him that a man's character was defined by what he did when no one was watching. He thought about his mother, who had always said that silence in the face of wrongdoing was its own form of betrayal. And he thought about William, who had always treated him with basic human decency in a place where many did not. Marcus made his decision. He did not know exactly how he would do it or what would happen after, but he knew he could not remain silent anymore. The question was not whether to speak up. The question was how to do it in a way that would actually make a difference, that would get through the walls that had been built around the prince. He closed the notes app on his phone, looked at the photograph on his mantle. It was from his graduation day at the Security Academy, young and idealistic, proud to be starting a career in service. He wondered what that young man would think of him now, standing at this crossroads. Marcus had always believed that honor meant following orders and maintaining protocol. But he was beginning to understand that real honor sometimes meant knowing when the rules were being used to perpetrate wrongs rather than prevent them. The hardest part of duty, he realized, was not the physical dangers or the long hours. It was knowing when your true obligation was to something bigger than the chain of command. The opportunity Marcus had been waiting for came unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning. William had a rare opening in his schedule, 30-minute window where he usually took his coffee alone in the private sitting room. Ashworth was away at a meeting across town, and Victoria was dealing with a minor press crisis. For the first time in weeks, the gatekeepers were occupied elsewhere. Marcus knew this might be his only chance. His hands were sweating inside his gloves as he stood at his post. The corridors were quiet, the usual bustle of palace life temporarily paused. He could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears as he made a decision that would change everything. He knocked softly on the door. William's voice called out for him to enter. Marcus stepped inside, his posture perfect despite the chaos in his mind. William looked up from his newspaper, surprised to see one of his security detail entering uninvited. "Is something wrong?" William asked, immediately concerned. That was typical of him, Marcus thought. Always worried about others first. Marcus closed the door behind him. His mouth was dry, but he forced the words out. "Sir, I need to speak with you about a matter of some importance. It is irregular, and I understand if you would prefer I go through proper channels, but I believe those channels are part of the problem." William set down his newspaper, his full attention now on Marcus. "Go on for a moment." Marcus hesitated. This was it, the point of no return. Once he spoke, there would be no taking it back. His career, his security, everything he had built over 17 years stood balanced on the edge of this moment. "Sir, I have been in your security detail for the past 8 months. In that time, I have observed certain patterns that concern me greatly. I believe you are not receiving accurate information about several of your key initiatives, particularly the mental health project you have been working on." William's expression shifted from curious to guarded. "That is a serious allegation. What exactly have you observed?" Marcus took a breath and began. He spoke carefully, sticking to facts rather than interpretations. He described the conversation he had overheard between Ashworth and Victoria about redirecting funds from the mental health initiative. He mentioned the documents that never reached William, the meetings that were rescheduled without his input, the systematic way information was being filtered before it got to him. As Marcus spoke, he watched William's face. The prince was listening intently, but there was skepticism there too. Why should he believe a guard over his trusted advisors? They had credentials, experience, relationships. Marcus was just the man who stood by the door. "These are substantial claims," William said slowly. "Do you have any proof?" Marcus had anticipated this question. From his pocket, he pulled out a small notebook. It was a risk bringing physical evidence, but he had no choice. "I have kept notes, sir. Dates, times, what I observed. I have no recordings or documents because I have no access to those, but I have been thorough in documenting what I have seen and heard." William took the notebook, flipping through the pages. His expression grew darker as he read. Marcus had listed everything systematically: conversations overheard, documents intercepted, meetings mysteriously canceled. It was damning, if William chose to believe it. "Are you telling me this?" William asked, looking up from the notebook. "You must know what this could mean for your position." "Yes, sir." "I do." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "But I took an oath when I joined this service. I swore to protect, and I have come to realize that protection is not just about physical threats. Sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones that come from people we trust, from inside our own circles." Before William could respond, there were footsteps in the corridor outside. Marcus recognized them immediately. Ashworth was back earlier than expected. William heard them too, and something shifted in his expression. He quickly handed the notebook back to Marcus. "Return to your post," William said quietly. "We will speak about this later." Marcus slipped the notebook back into his pocket and exited the room just as Ashworth rounded the corner. The private secretary's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw Marcus, but he said nothing. Marcus returned to his position by the wall, his face expressionless. As Ashworth entered William's sitting room, the rest of that day was agony for Marcus. He had no way of knowing what William thought, whether he believed anything Marcus had told him, or if he was about to be dismissed for insubordination. Every footstep in the corridor made him tense, expecting to be summoned to meet with his superiors. That evening, as Marcus was preparing to end his shift, one of the senior household staff approached him. "You are requested in the East Wing study at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Come in civilian clothes." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The East Wing study was where private meetings were held, away from the main flow of palace activity. Civilian clothes meant this was not official business through the security chain of command. Either William wanted to continue their conversation privately, or Marcus was about to be quietly dismissed. He went home that night and told his wife Sarah everything. She listened without interruption as he explained what he had done, what he had risked. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure about this? She finally asked. We have worked so hard to get where we are. 3 more years, and you would have your full pension. We could retire comfortably now. I may have thrown it all away, Marcus finished for her. I know, but Sarah, if I had stayed silent, could I have looked at myself in the mirror? Could I have explained to our children that I watched someone being manipulated and deceived and did nothing? Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. I married you because you were a good man, Marcus. That has not changed. Whatever happens, we will face it together. The next morning, Marcus dressed in his best suit and made his way to the palace. His security credentials still worked, which he took as a good sign. He was directed to the East Wing study by a staff member who gave nothing away in their expression. When Marcus entered, he found William there, but also someone else, an older man Marcus recognized as Lord Pemberton. One of the few members of the royal household who had been there for decades. Pemberton had a reputation for integrity and had served the family through multiple generations. Please sit down, William said, gesturing to a chair. Marcus sat, his back straight, hands folded in his lap. William did not waste time. I have spent the past day investigating the matters you brought to my attention. Lord Pemberton has assisted me in making some discreet inquiries. I need you to understand something, Marcus. What you told me yesterday was difficult to hear. These are people I have trusted, people who were vetted and recommended by others I respect. Marcus felt his heart sink. This sounded like the beginning of a dismissal. However, William continued, and Marcus dared to hope, the evidence supports your observations. Lord Pemberton was able to confirm several instances where information was withheld from me or presented in misleading ways. The situation with the mental health initiative was exactly as you described. Funds were redirected, and I was simply not informed. Lord Pemberton spoke up, his voice grave. Young man, what you did was highly irregular. You broke protocol, went outside the chain of command, and made serious accusations against senior staff members. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. I understand. You also, Pemberton continued, may have prevented a serious injustice from continuing. Not many people would have had the courage to speak up, especially knowing what it could cost them personally. William leaned forward in his chair. I need to know, Marcus. Is there more? Beyond what you have already told me? Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment to lay everything out. Yes, sir. There is more. The issue goes deeper than just the mental health initiative. Over the past months, I have observed what appears to be a systematic effort to control the information you receive and the decisions you make. It involves multiple staff members, and it extends to your scheduling, your public appearances, and your access to certain people and organizations. For the next hour, Marcus detailed everything he had observed. He spoke about the intern who had been transferred after trying to deliver documents directly to William. He described how Ashworth controlled access to the prince, creating a bottleneck where everything had to flow through him. He explained Victoria's methods of presenting information in ways that led William to predetermined conclusions while making him think he was making his own decisions. William listened, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. When Marcus finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Why now? William asked. You say this has been going on for months. Why did you finally decide to speak up yesterday? Marcus chose his words carefully. I overheard a conversation about your upcoming tour, sir. They were deliberately structuring it to keep you away from the very people and organizations you most wanted to meet. It made me realize that this was not going to stop or improve on its own. And I thought about what would happen if I said nothing, if I just kept my head down and let it continue. I realized I could not live with that. Lord Pemberton exchanged a glance with William. Your Highness, this situation requires immediate attention. If even half of what Marcus has described is accurate, we have a significant problem that needs to be addressed. William stood and walked to the window, looking out over the palace gardens. He was quiet for several minutes while Marcus and Pemberton waited. Finally, he turned back to face them. Marcus, what you have done took remarkable courage. It also puts me in a difficult position. If I act on this information overtly, it will create a scandal within the household. Staff members will be dismissed. There will be investigations, and it will become a media circus. But if I do nothing, I am complicit in allowing this deception to continue. There may be a middle path, Pemberton suggested. Address the issues quietly but firmly. Make changes that appear natural but that effectively dismantle the structure that has been built around you. It will take time, but it can be done without creating the appearance of a crisis. William nodded slowly. And Marcus, I need to know, are you prepared for what comes next? Because even if we handle this discreetly, there will be consequences. Ashworth and the others will realize that someone spoke up. They will look for who betrayed them, and you will be on a very short list of possibilities. Marcus understood what William was really asking. I have accepted that risk, sir. I made my choice when I knocked on your door yesterday. Whatever happens next, I can live with it because I know I did the right thing. The plan that William and Lord Pemberton developed over the following days was subtle and methodical. There would be no dramatic confrontations or sudden dismissals. Instead, changes would be implemented gradually, in ways that seemed organic and unremarkable to outside observers. First, William requested a comprehensive review of all his charitable initiatives, something that could be justified as standard practice for accountability purposes. An independent auditor from outside the royal household was brought in. Ashworth and Victoria had no grounds to object without raising suspicions. But Marcus could see the tension in their faces when the announcement was made. The audit took 2 weeks. Marcus watched as William personally met with the auditor multiple times, reviewing findings that were not shared with the usual staff members. The mental health initiative discrepancies were discovered officially, though the auditor presented them as accounting irregularities rather than deliberate fraud. It gave William the justification he needed to make changes without explicitly accusing anyone of deception. During this time, Marcus noticed a shift in how Ashworth and Victoria operated. They were more careful, more guarded. They began to suspect that something was wrong, but they had no concrete evidence of who had exposed them or what exactly William knew. The uncertainty made them paranoid. One afternoon, Marcus was stationed outside a meeting room when Victoria walked past. She stopped and looked at him with calculating eyes. You are Marcus Thompson, correct? You have been with the security detail for quite some time. 17 years, ma'am, Marcus replied, his voice neutral. That is impressive. You must see and hear a great deal in your position. Her tone was casual, but there was an edge to it, a probing quality that made Marcus's instincts alert. I focus on security matters, ma'am. Everything else is background noise. Victoria smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Of course, I just wonder sometimes if the security staff feel their perspectives are valued. If they ever have concerns about how things are run, they should feel comfortable sharing those concerns through proper channels. Marcus understood the implied threat. She was fishing, trying to determine if anyone from security had spoken to William. We have excellent protocols for reporting concerns, ma'am. The system works well. After Victoria walked away, Marcus felt a chill. They were actively looking for the leak now. He reported the interaction to Lord Pemberton, who assured him they were moving as quickly as they could while maintaining discretion. The real breakthrough came when the independent auditor discovered that funds from the mental health initiative had been redirected to a communications campaign that primarily benefited Victoria's portfolio. The campaign had been presented to William as using surplus funds, but the audit revealed that money had been deliberately diverted before William had even approved the mental health project's budget. With this concrete evidence, William had the justification he needed to act. He called a private meeting with Ashworth and Victoria separately. Marcus was not present for those meetings, but he learned later what had transpired. William confronted each of them with the audit findings. He did not accuse them of broader deception, only focused on the specific financial irregularities. He gave them a choice: resign quietly with references that would allow them to find positions elsewhere, or face a formal investigation that would almost certainly destroy their careers in royal service and beyond. Both chose to resign. Ashworth left first, accepting a position with a private estate in Scotland. Victoria followed a week later, taking a role in corporate communications in London. To the outside world, these were simply career moves. staff changes that happened regularly in large institutions. Only a handful of people knew the real story, but the situation was not over for Marcus. 2 days after Victoria's resignation was announced, Marcus was called into a meeting with the head of palace security, Commander Harrison. The commander was a stern man in his 60s who had served in the military before joining the royal household. "Sit down, Thompson," Harrison said, his tone giving nothing away. "We need to discuss your future with the security detail." Marcus sat, preparing himself for what he had known was inevitable. "Yes, sir." Harrison studied him for a long moment. "It has come to my attention that you took it upon yourself to speak directly to His Royal Displeasure, Highness, about matters that were well outside the scope of your duties. You went around the chain of command, violated protocol, and inserted yourself into household affairs that do not concern security personnel." "Yes, sir. I did. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "Sir, I believed I observed matters that His Royal Highness needed to be aware of. I made a judgment call about the best way to communicate that information. I understand that my methods were irregular." "Irregular," Harrison repeated, his voice hard. "That is one way to put it. Another way would be to say you overstepped your authority and violated the trust that is essential to your position. Do you understand how serious that is?" "I do, sir." Harrison was quiet for a moment, tapping his fingers on the desk. Then his expression softened slightly, though his tone remained professional. "What you did was highly unorthodox, Thompson. In most circumstances, I would be preparing your dismissal papers right now. However, I have been informed by sources I trust that your actions, while irregular, were motivated by genuine concern and ultimately proved to be warranted."
Ow.
Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but kept his expression neutral. That being said, Harrison continued, "You cannot remain in your current position. Your relationship with the staff members you reported with the broader household has been compromised. There will always be suspicion, always questions. For your own safety and the integrity of the security detail, you need to be reassigned." "I understand, sir." "Where will I be transferred?" "Actually, that is where this conversation becomes more interesting. Lord Pemberton has recommended you for a new position that is being created. The royal household has decided to establish an internal oversight role. Someone who reports directly to the senior leadership and has the authority to investigate concerns from any staff member, including security personnel. They want someone with experience, someone who has demonstrated integrity even when it was difficult. They want you." Marcus was stunned. He had expected to be demoted, possibly dismissed despite the favorable outcome of his report. This was the opposite. "Sir, I do not have any experience in oversight or investigation. But you have 17 years of experience in paying attention, in understanding how the household operates, and most importantly, you have proven that you will speak up when something is wrong. That is what they need for this role." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "It is a promotion, Thompson. Better pay, better benefits, and your pension will not only be secure, but enhanced. Your family will be taken care of." "What about the security detail? That has been my life for 17 years. You'll still work closely with security, but your scope will be broader. Think of it as protecting the household from internal threats rather than external ones." Harrison's expression became almost gentle. "Thompson, you did something remarkable. You saw a problem, you accepted the personal risk of addressing it, and you did so for the right reasons. That kind of integrity is rare. Do not diminish it by second-guessing yourself now." Marcus left the meeting in a daze. He had walked in, expecting to lose everything, and instead found himself being offered more than he had ever imagined. When he told Sarah that evening, she cried, and they held each other in their small kitchen, grateful and exhausted and relieved. The transition took several weeks. Marcus had to learn new skills, new protocols, new ways of operating within the palace structure. But he found that his years of observing, of understanding the unspoken dynamics and hidden patterns, served him well in his new role. William personally thanked him in a brief, private meeting. "What you did was not easy," the prince said. "You put your career, your security, everything on the line because you believed it was right. That is the truest form of service. I wanted you to know that it has not gone unnoticed or unappreciated." Marcus felt awkward receiving praise for what he still saw as simply doing his duty, but he accepted the thanks with grace. "I am glad I could help, sir. And I am glad the situation was resolved." "It has been resolved in terms of the immediate problem," William said. "But you helped me see something larger. I had allowed myself to become isolated without realizing it. I had trusted the structures around me without questioning them. You reminded me that trust must be earned continually, not just assumed based on position or credentials." As Marcus settled into his new role over the following months, he discovered that the problems he had uncovered were symptoms of a larger issue. The palace was a massive institution with hundreds of staff members, complex hierarchies, and unwritten rules that governed everything. It was easy for abuses of power to develop, for small compromises to accumulate into larger problems. His new position allowed him to create systems for staff to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. He established regular reviews of major initiatives to ensure transparency and accountability. He worked with department heads to break down the silos that had allowed Ashworth and Victoria to operate without oversight. It was not glamorous work. Most of what Marcus did now involved paperwork, meetings, and careful conversations with people who were sometimes defensive or resistant to change. But he found it deeply satisfying in a way that standing posts never had been. He was making a real difference in how the household operated. His colleagues from the security detail had mixed reactions to his promotion. Some were happy for him, recognizing that he had earned the opportunity. Others were resentful, feeling that he had betrayed the unwritten code of keeping your head down and not making waves. Marcus understood both perspectives. He had been part of that culture for 17 years. One evening, about 6 months after taking the new position, Marcus was walking through the palace corridors after a late meeting. He passed by the spot where he used to stand post outside William's private study. A young security officer was there now, standing with the same perfect posture Marcus had once maintained. Marcus paused and spoke quietly to the young man. "How long have you been in the detail?" "Just 6 months, sir," the guard replied, clearly nervous about being addressed by someone in a senior position. "Good. Listen, I want you to remember something. Your job is to protect people, and that does not just mean watching for physical threats. Sometimes the most important protection you can offer is speaking up when you see something wrong. Do not ever be afraid to use your voice if it matters." The young guard looked confused but nodded. "Yes, sir." Marcus smiled slightly. "You will understand someday." He continued walking, knowing that the guard probably thought he was being given vague motivational advice. But maybe, when it mattered, he would remember those words. The real test of what Marcus had built came almost a year after his promotion. A junior staff member from the communications department came to his office, looking terrified. Her name was Emily, and she was only 24 years old. Fresh out of university and in her first real job, "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about something, but I am scared I will lose my position if I say anything," she began, her voice shaking. Marcus gestured for her to sit down and close the door. "Whatever you tell me will be kept confidential unless you give me permission otherwise. That is a promise. Now, take your time and tell me what is wrong." Emily explained that her supervisor had been taking credit for her work on social media campaigns. That was bad enough, but worse. The supervisor was also subtly sabotaging Emily's projects so she would look incompetent, all while stealing her ideas for his own advancement. Emily had tried to speak with human resources, but they had dismissed her concerns, telling her she was young and needed to learn how things worked. Marcus listened carefully, taking notes. When Emily finished, he asked her several clarifying questions, gathering specific examples and timelines. Then he explained what would happen next. He would investigate the allegations discreetly. If they proved true, action would be taken. Emily would be protected from retaliation. Emily asked, her eyes red from crying. "I am nobody here. I am replaceable." He has been here for years and has connections. Marcus thought about his own moment of decision, standing outside William's study, weighing everything he could lose. "Because I have learned that the right thing is the right thing, regardless of who has more power or better connections. And because the household has changed, we do not tolerate abuse anymore, regardless of who was committing it. The investigation took 3 weeks. Marcus interviewed other junior staff members, reviewed work records, and examined email trails. What he found was worse than Emily had described. Her supervisor had been systematically exploiting young staff members for years, taking credit for their work and destroying their confidence and careers. He had survived this long because previous complaints had been dismissed as youthful inexperience or personality conflicts. When Marcus presented his findings to the senior household management, there was initial resistance. Emily's supervisor was well liked by his peers and had produced good results, at least on paper. But Marcus had documentation now, evidence that could not be dismissed. And he had the backing of William and Lord Pemberton, who had made it clear that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. The supervisor was terminated. 3 other staff members came forward with similar stories once they learned it was safe to do so. Emily remained in her position and was eventually promoted based on the merit of her own work. She stopped by Marcus's office months later to thank him. "You saved my career," she said. "I was ready to quit. I thought this was just how things were in places like this." Marcus shook his head. "You saved your career by having the courage to speak up. I just made sure you were heard. That is the difference we are trying to create here." Over the next 2 years, Marcus's oversight role expanded. He trained other staff members to recognize problems early, created anonymous reporting systems, and worked with department heads to build cultures of accountability. It was slow work, often frustrating, but he could see the changes taking root. The mental health initiative that had started this whole journey was eventually relaunched with proper funding and oversight. William was able to work directly with the organizations and communities he wanted to help, without interference or manipulation. The project became one of the most successful royal charitable efforts in years, helping thousands of young people access mental health support. Marcus never took credit for that success. When journalists occasionally asked about the initiative's difficult early period and subsequent turnaround, he simply said that good governance required constant attention and that the royal household was committed to transparency and accountability. The real story remained known only to a small circle. His relationship with William evolved over time. They were not friends, the difference in their positions made that impossible. But there was a mutual respect that went beyond professional courtesy. William would occasionally ask Marcus's opinion on household matters, valuing his perspective as someone who understood the institution from the inside, but was not afraid to challenge it. One day, William asked Marcus to walk with him in the palace gardens. It was an unusual request, but Marcus agreed. They walked in silence for several minutes before William spoke. "I have been thinking about what happened with Ashworth and Victoria, about how I allowed myself to become so isolated without realizing it. Do you know what troubles me most about that situation?" "No, sir. It is how easy it was. I consider myself reasonably intelligent, fairly perceptive, yet they were able to manipulate me for months, and I never suspected a thing. It makes me wonder what else I might be missing, what other blind spots I have." Marcus chose his words carefully. "If I may, sir, I think the lesson is not that you should become paranoid or distrustful. It is that even good people in positions of power need systems of accountability. You need people around you who can speak truth even when it is uncomfortable, and you need to create an environment where they feel safe doing so." William nodded slowly. "That is what you have been building with your oversight work." "Yes, sir. It is not about catching people doing wrong. It is about creating a culture where doing wrong becomes harder and speaking up becomes easier." They walked in silence for another few minutes. Then William said, "I want you to know something, Marcus. What you did that day when you knocked on my door that changed things, not just the immediate situation with Ashworth and Victoria, but how I think about leadership, about trust, about responsibility. You gave me a gift, even though it was a painful one at the time. You gave me the truth." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise, as he always did. "I just did what needed to be done, sir." That is exactly my point. Most people do not. Most people see problems and rationalize why it is not their place to address them. You saw a problem and accepted the personal cost of solving it. That is rare, and it is valuable. As they returned to the palace, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that November evening when he overheard Ashworth and Victoria's conversation. He had risked everything: his career, his pension, his family's security, in a matter of principle. He had been terrified, uncertain, and utterly convinced he was probably destroying his life. Instead, he had found a purpose deeper than anything he had experienced in 17 years of standing post. He had discovered that real protection was not just about physical safety. It was about creating systems and cultures where people could do their best work, where truth could be spoken, where manipulation and abuse could not flourish in darkness. His children were proud of him in a way they had not been before. His son, who had once wanted to follow him into security work, was now studying organizational ethics at university, inspired by his father's example. His daughter volunteered with mental health organizations, motivated partly by hearing about the initiative her father had helped save. Sarah told him one evening that he seemed more at peace than he had been in years. "When you were in security, you always seemed a bit restless, like you were waiting for something. Now, you seem settled." Marcus thought about that. She was right. Standing post had been about vigilance, about waiting for threats that might never come. His new work was active, engaged, purposeful. He was not waiting for problems anymore. He was preventing them, or addressing them when they emerged. It was a different kind of protection, but it felt more meaningful. There were still challenges. Not everyone appreciated what Marcus was trying to do. Some staff members saw oversight as interference. Some department heads resented having to explain their decisions. There were moments when Marcus questioned whether he was making a difference or just creating more bureaucracy. But then someone like Emily would come to his office, scared and vulnerable, trusting him with their truth. And Marcus would remember why this work mattered. Each person who felt safe enough to speak up, each problem addressed before it became a crisis. Each system improved to serve people better rather than just perpetuating itself. These were the victories that counted. On the 3rd anniversary of his promotion, Lord Pemberton invited Marcus to lunch. Over a quiet meal in one of the palace's private dining rooms, Pemberton reflected on the changes that had taken place. "When we first met in that East Wing study 3 years ago, I was not certain how this would unfold," Pemberton admitted. "You were asking us to trust you, a security guard with serious allegations against trusted staff members. It was a risk to take you seriously." "I understand that, sir. I've always been grateful that you and His Royal Highness chose to investigate rather than dismiss me." Pemberton smiled. "Do you know what convinced me that you were telling the truth? It was not your evidence, though, that was helpful. It was the fact that you had everything to lose and nothing to gain by coming forward. People do not usually risk their livelihoods for lies. They do it for truth." "I have often wondered what would have happened if I had stayed silent," Marcus said quietly. "If I had just kept my head down and finished my last few years in security, you would have had your pension and your peace of mind, I suppose. But the problems would have continued and likely gotten worse. William would still be operating in a bubble of manipulated information. Other staff members would continue to be exploited. The mental health initiative would have failed, and young people would have suffered for it." Marcus had thought about these alternate realities many times. "I try not to dwell on what-ifs. I made my choice, and I have to trust it was the right one." "It was," Pemberton said firmly, "and not just because of the immediate outcomes. You changed something fundamental about how this household operates. You reminded us that integrity matters, that speaking up matters, that we all have an obligation to each other that transcends rank and position." As Marcus left the lunch, he thought about legacy. He would eventually retire from this position, and someone else would take over the oversight work. Would they maintain what he had built? Would the culture of accountability survive? Or would the institution slowly drift back to old patterns? There were no guarantees. But Marcus had learned that you cannot control outcomes, only actions. You can only make the choice that seems right in the moment, and trust that it matters, even if you never see all the results. Years later, long after Marcus had retired and was living quietly with Sarah in a small cottage in the countryside, he received an unexpected letter. It was from a young woman named Claire who had started working in the palace household. She wrote about how she had faced a difficult situation at work and had used the reporting systems Marcus had created. Her concerns had been addressed promptly and fairly, and she was still in her position, doing work she loved. "I learned later that you were the person who created these systems," Claire wrote. "I wanted to thank you, even though we have never met. Because of what you built, I did not have to choose between my principles and my career. I could do the right thing and be protected for it. That means more than you can possibly know." Marcus read the letter several times, sitting in his garden with tears in his eyes. This was the answer to his question about legacy. The systems would outlive him. The culture would persist. Other people would face their moments of choice and would have the support he had not had when he stood outside William's study, weighing everything he could lose. Sarah found him there and read the letter over his shoulder. "You did good, Marcus. You changed things." "I just knocked on a door," Marcus said, though he was smiling. "You knocked on a door when everyone else walked past it? That is what makes the difference." As the sun set over their garden, Marcus thought about that November evening years ago, about the fear and uncertainty and conviction that had driven him to act. He thought about all the moments since then, the challenges and victories and quiet satisfactions of work that mattered. He had been a guard who stood post for 17 years, invisible and silent. Then he had become someone who spoke up, who risked everything, who insisted that truth and integrity were worth the cost. And in doing so, he had discovered that real courage was not about facing external threats. It was about facing the internal ones, the fears, the doubts, the voices that whispered it was easier to stay silent. Marcus Thompson had made his choice, and it had changed everything. Not just for himself, but for everyone who came after him. Everyone who would benefit from the systems he built and the culture he helped create. He had been one person, in one moment, making one difficult decision. But that, he had learned, was how real change happened. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage leading to another, until the impossible became inevitable. His last stand had become the foundation for something bigger than himself. And that was the greatest protection he could have offered not to any one person, but to the principle that truth and integrity still mattered, even in places where power often obscured them. The guard's watch had ended, but his legacy endured.